Okay, so now to talk about our first transformation, we're going to look at reflections. Now, we already know what a reflection is. We've seen reflections in things like mirrors or anything like that. In fact, I could reflect this camera if I wanted to. But the reflection, basically, it's a flip over a line. For linear, what we call line reflections. We will look at a point reflection later on too, but most of the time we think of a line as a line reflection. Okay? The notation, because like in mathematics we have little shorthands for everything, right? We use a little r for reflections. Okay? And then down here you'll see a letter or maybe a series of letters. This tells me what I'm reflecting over. So this is known as the line of reflection. Okay. And then in parentheses, it's going to have some kind of figure. Maybe we'll say triangle ABC. Okay. This is what's known as the pre-image. Okay. And it's where we are before we perform the reflection. Then we perform a reflection, and that gives me a new figure, A prime, B prime, C prime. You saw me in our intro video use this prime symbol. That just tells me that it's the next generation of this, okay? And we call that the image. So the image is what you get after reflection. Kind of like you stand in front of a mirror, it reflects and shows you an image. Properties of these, well, we got a lot of things that don't change. Let's see, distance is preserved. So distance is preserved. Angles are preserved. So it means it's an isometry. Remember we talked about that. Parallelism is preserved. What that means is if you had a figure that had parallel segments, kind of like we had this figure here earlier, so that these two sides are parallel, after I flip it over, they're still parallel to each other. Okay, that's all. Nothing fancy there. What's not preserved? Orientation is changed. Orientation changes. That tells me that this is an opposite isometry. Okay, opposite because the orientation changes. Isometry because distance and angle are preserved. Okay, so in other words, when we flip it over, it's still the same size. So let's look at an example of what that might look like. So here we see, there's my pre-image, and then it reflects over line K, so reflection over line K of the pre-image gives me my new image. Okay, so this is my line of reflection. Some people actually call it a line of symmetry. And we call it a line of symmetry because if you look at the length of things, the length from C to here, if I go across there, this length is the same as that length. Same is true if I go from A to A prime. These two lengths are the same. And from B to B prime, these two lengths are the same. So we get all these little congruent pieces. This is the same as that. This is the same as that. This is the same as that. And also notice that because I'm doing distances, they're all perpendicular. Okay. What we end up saying is that this line ends up being a perpendicular bisector of that segment there. So that's a neat little thing that comes in. This line of symmetry or this line of reflection is the perpendicular bisector of the segment created between the image and the pre-image. So perpendicular bisector of that, and of that, and of that. That's a really neat little fact about these. So that's the ideas. We've got some special rules that happen if we're on the XY axis. So looking at problems on the XY axis, there are 4 different rules that we need to learn. The first one, if I reflect over the x-axis. So remember where your x-axis is. My x-axis is right there. So there's my line of reflection. And I've got this point here, A. A is at point 3, 4. If I reflect over the x-axis, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. My new point is 3, -4. Look at what changed. The y value became negative. So we can get a rule here. If I reflect over the x-axis, then the point AB becomes the point A, -B. We change the sign of the y value. If I reflect over the y-axis, so here's my y-axis, and we take that same point A, it's at the point 3, 4. So that means I got to go 1, 2, 3, and 3 to the other side. So that puts me at A prime, but its location is -3, 4. So look what happened. This time the x value changed. So our rule for that is -A, +B, or change the sign of A. If A is already negative, then when you negate a negative, it becomes positive. Okay, the next one. If we reflect over the line y equals x, now the line y equals x is a special line. It's this line here, where if you go over 1 on the x, you go up 1 on the y. If you go over 3 on the x, I go up 3. So that gives me that line. So this is the line y equals x. I still got the same point, 3, 4. It's a little harder to cross. Okay, when I do this one, I'm crossing over to here somewhere. So that's going to put me right there. So A prime is at, look what that is, 4, 3. We switch the order. So this tells me that, oh, I just flipped the order of those. So if I reflect over the line y equals x, then my points just flip that order. If I make that slope negative, so it becomes this line, y equals -x, and I'm taking this point and flipping it over. It's a little harder to get to, but basically this point that was at 3, 4, I flip it and negate it. So think about it as I'm coming down and over. I got to go over and down the same thing. So that becomes -4, -3. So yeah, the rule for this is flip and negate. Okay. So if I'm just going over y equals x, I just flip them. If it's y equals -x, I flip them and change the signs. Okay. Try some examples of that. Here's 3 examples. I want you to flip over the x-axis, this point, flip this point over to y-axis, flip this point over the line y equals x. Do those 3. We'll come back and look at the answers. Okay, so our flip over the x-axis, our rule tells us to negate the y value. So x stays the same. Negating a 3 gives me a +3. Flipping over to y-axis, I negate the x value. It was already negative, so now it becomes 5 and keep the y. When I flip over the line y equals x, I just flip the 2 things. So that becomes 8, -1. And there we go. Try some practice on these. I got some Delta Math for you to try some practice, okay? Give that a shot. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll go over this information. We'll go over these 4 rules, and then we'll also talk about other ways to do reflections. Have a good night.